Good morning, and thank you for joining PSHSA's The Workplace Reimagined Virtual Conference. My name is Ricky Terrio, and I am the Manager of Client Experience and Operations here at PSHSA. I am pleased to welcome you to the session, Courage, Creativity, and Culture, a recipe for surviving and thriving in the new pandemic reality, presented by Amy Weaver, HR Director at the House of Friendship. Before we begin, I want to mention that there will be an opportunity to answer a few questions following the presentation. Please feel free to enter your questions in the chat and we will select some to ask from there. While COVID-19 has had a devastating effect on so many fronts, it has revealed opportunities, insights, innovations, and collaborations that have literally sprung to life due to the pandemic. As a leader and coach of people, culture, and performance, Amy Weaver has practiced the art of human resources for 20 years, contributing to work settings in the private, healthcare, and not-for-profit sectors. As House of Friendship's Human Resources Director, Amy leads and influences an organizational culture that celebrates and engages all team members at a human level. Amy's personal mission statement is to inspire others to draw closer, connect, grow, and learn as individuals and as a community. Amy is a certified human resources leader, graduating from the Professional and Personal Coach Program, Concordia University, and Human Resources Program at Conestoga College. She is a leadership practices inventory trained coach, a trained facilitator of the Leadership Challenge. We are pleased to welcome Amy Weaver, who will reflect on how she and the Friendship House reacted to unprecedented leadership challenges brought on by the pandemic, and through resilience, collaboration, and creativity was able to keep staff and participants safe. Hello and welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, Ricky, for that introduction. And I'm just really thankful that PSHSA has been a group that I've worked closely with over many years, working in the hospital sector and now in social services. And I'm just really grateful to be here today. A lot of great speakers. I hope everybody's enjoying their day. All right, and as Ricky said, I work for House of Friendship, and we're a not-for-profit agency located in Southern Ontario in the Waterloo region. And we serve in the area of food, housing, addictions, and community services. And I have the honor of supporting our teams with people and culture strategies, and our team of over 270 amazing individuals. So I'm going to start today by going back to the winter of 2019. I'm sitting in a circle with many of our staff, and to be honest, it's not a great meeting. We're there because the staff have dealt with an incredible amount of loss and suffering in the past couple of weeks. We've experienced over 20 deaths due to overdose during that period. Some were men who were staying at our shelter, of which this team supports, and some were people in the community who our team cares for as well. And the loss and anguish that they were feeling during this time was incredible. And they had come to sort of talk about that and share how they were coping with that time. And they were talking about the extreme stress that they were feeling with the amount of police calls and calls for emergency services that they were experiencing, often due to the complex mental health needs in our shelter, and sometimes due to the violence that we were seeing as well. And they were exhausted and dejected and feeling a real sense of hopelessness because they were really struggling with trying to find housing for any of the 51 men that we served in our shelter. Part of that was due to a real housing crisis in the community and a lack of appropriate housing for the men. And part of that was that many of the men were not housing ready, what we would refer to as not housing ready, just not able to make it in their own place. And this was just an enormous struggle. People who come to the shelter, part of our goal in working with them is to find them appropriate housing and to help them move along that housing spectrum. And so this was causing a great deal of strain and difficulty for our team. And there were safety issues that were impacting our team as well as our community and the area around us, including our downtown area, because of this backlog of people not being able to find housing. And so during this meeting, as I said, it wasn't a great meeting. Staff were really sharing their struggle and the anguish and the grief that they were feeling, the heavy grief of loss, and their anger and their frustration at the system and the struggles and the gaps. And to be sitting in that group and hearing that from the team was just heartbreaking and a really, really difficult meeting. In the fall of 2019, I'm again sitting in a room, and this time I'm sitting with about 600 other people at our annual friendship dinner. And we're there that night to hear about an incredible vision called shelter care. And it's this vision about integrating healthcare services like a medical clinic and addiction services and mental health supports within a shelter environment. Pretty radical idea, pretty exciting idea, not new to Canada, but new to this region. And everyone who was there was invigorated. The seeds of community collaboration were being sown and key partnerships were forming all around this idea. Everyone who heard it just thought it was the best way forward. Staff who were there and some of the men from the shelter who had attended that evening as well, compared to the hopelessness that they had felt just a few months before, had a new sense of hope for where we might be going in the future. Now, we didn't know how we were going to do this. We didn't know when we were going to do this, other than we wanted to do it soon. The plans for that were in very early stages, but this idea was there, and the idea was engaging, and people were really rallying around that idea. And then last month at the same event, this time held virtually, we heard different information, new information, that the first time I heard it, I actually teared up and cried. It was such incredible news. 50% reduction in overdoses in our shelter, 75% reduction in calls to emergency services. 56 men had been housed in the past 6 months, and not one of them had returned to the shelter, which is something we haven't seen in years and years. 0 cases of COVID-19 in our shelter or in any of our programs across House of Friendship. And all while serving a 100% increase in the men that we serve. So we'd moved from 51 men to over 100 men. So what exactly happened between the winter of 2019 and the fall of 2020? If you said COVID-19, you're absolutely correct. So to pull all this together, let's go back for a minute to a different date, to March the 20th, 8 long days into the pandemic. Just go with me for a second, close your eyes. Try to remember back to March the 20th. Where were you at that time? What were you doing? What were you thinking about? Or maybe you don't want to do that. I know I don't want to go back there very often, but I can tell you where I was that day. I was at an incident management meeting, no surprise. And I'm sitting there with, again, tears in my eyes and my mouth gaping open because of what I had just heard our housing director say. City buses are on the way to the shelter to take the men to the Radisson Hotel. The staff are getting them ready. The buses will be there by 4. After 8 days of watching the COVID numbers climb in the province and in our region, and keeping an eye out for community spread to start, and holding our breath for what we feared was the inevitability of widespread illness in our shelter, we could breathe. After a week of desperately trying to figure out where to go and what to do and how to best help our guys, we felt like we had something to cling to. 51 men would be moving out of our cramped emergency shelter, leaving sleeping quarters where often men were sleeping 4, 5, or 6 to a room. This room only has 2, which is quite nice and lucky, but often many of our rooms had more guys than that in them. And they would be moving to a hotel where there would be 2 people per room, 1 shared washroom between them, and an isolation floor for anyone who was dealing with symptoms that was staffed and supported with a medical team. Our men and our staff would be safe. I cried real tears at that to find that out. I left the meeting as soon as it was over, and I grabbed a mask and gloves, and I went straight over to our shelter next door because I just had to see what was going on. They had just received the news also that this was happening. There was really no plan for this to happen. It was happening fast. And when I got there, the place was full of excitement and nerves and a sense of urgency. Everybody knew that we had to get moving. Staff had lists in hand and hand sanitizer, and they were trying to just work with the guys to get them back to their rooms and coax them to kind of start gathering their belongings and getting organized. And they were talking with them and trying to calm them down as well. It was news that was great for us, and it was great for the guys, but it was sudden and unexpected for them. And as I mentioned earlier, many of them deal with a lot of complex issues. And so the idea of this move, for some, they felt great. They were super happy to hear that they would be moving to this safer, nicer location. But for many of them, the shelter was all that they knew. And so there was a lot of anxiety, and our staff were really just trying to support the guys as they were having these conversations and just trying to calm them and help them understand where we were going and what we would be doing there, and just make them feel good about it. And in the midst of all of this, I look up and I see this incredible physician, Dr. Chris Steingart. And Dr. Steingart is a local physician and the leader of Sanguine Health Center, which serves many of the same population that we do. And he's going around room to room, and he's checking one by one on all of the guys. He's doing a full COVID assessment to see if anybody's symptomatic, if there's any concerns, any exposures. And he's also doing just a general overall health assessment with them, which was pretty incredible and something that didn't happen every day, but was, I think, a sign of things to come. And out in the front foyer, as I went back out there, it was a buzz with activity. We had, all the belongings were starting to land in the foyer. There was bags and bins, and bikes were coming forward, and skateboards, and the guys were kind of starting to mill around. It's a very small area in that front of the shelter. It's not big enough for all that activity. So staff were really trying to move people out, and some people were really keen to get on those first buses. So they were helping them to get outside and be ready, and the buses started to arrive. And so I helped along with the other staff to just move the few men that we could. We were really bringing them over in smaller groups so that we could have the distancing on the bus. So I stayed for the first couple of buses to help everybody kind of get settled, but I eventually had to go back and finish the work that I was doing back in my office. And as I did, I continued to watch the buses come and go for the rest of the afternoon as the rest of the men made their way over to the Radisson Hotel. As soon as I was done work, I jumped in my car and headed over to the Radisson to see how things were going over there. And when I arrived there, the last bus had just gotten there, and there were still some men in the lobby that you can see here. They just arrived with their belongings, and again, staff are just really doing their best to go around and check on everybody and make sure that everybody's arrived safely, that people are doing okay, that they found their room, and they're getting settled, and they just are doing this incredible job of connecting with each individual. And the Radisson staff are there, and they're in their, pristine uniforms, just looking professional. And, I wonder if they had some reservations about their new guests, but you wouldn't have known it. They were absolutely professional and kind and welcoming, and they never stopped being that way the whole time that we were there. And then I see Jessica, who you can see in this picture, and she's our shelter manager. And she is literally trying to be in 20 places at the same time. She is checking on staff. She's checking on logistics. She's checking on the shelter at 63 Charles. She's, checking in with the Radisson staff. And as I said, she only found out hours before that this was happening. We all did. So she's just a flurry of activity. And at one point she blurts out, probably around 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, we have to call the evening shift. They don't even know where we are. We had moved that quickly. So as I kind of wandered up to the other floors to just see how things were going and chat with the staff and chat with some of the gentlemen that I saw up there, and things seemed to be going pretty well. As dinner arrived, staff used that opportunity to go around door to door to deliver the food and just talk with each person and really make connection and make sure that people were doing okay. And I think that seemed to really lessen the stress for the staff and for the guys as well. And so I started to make my way back downstairs, and I got in the elevator with one other gentleman, and I asked him, how's today gone for you? How are you doing? This is a big day, right? And he said, I have a really comfortable bed, my own bathroom, and I'm feeling pretty good. So that was awesome to hear. And he was one of the men who was quite comfortable with the move and had done well in the transition. I stayed really late that night, in part because there was a lot happening and I wanted to be supportive. But really, I was having an amazing time there. The energy and excitement and just the activity and just the knowledge that we had this space now. After a week of basically sheer panic of trying to figure out how we were going to keep these guys safe, we had this spot, and I really just didn't want to go home. So eventually I did go home. And like many people, I stayed there for the next couple of months, working primarily out of my house. But as for the shelter team, things were really just beginning. Our team was one of several that were working in the community, trying to fill every gap. As the notices kept coming out about sheltering in place, I'm sure many of you saw on social media, and maybe people who work in social services, that question, well, how do we shelter in place? How do people who are homeless shelter in place? What do we do? And it's a great question. And there's no one right answer to that. And so many different community groups, community partners, social service agencies worked in various different ways to find a number of solutions so that every single person would have a place to go. Those seeds of community collaboration that I talked about at the beginning were in full bloom at this point. And our partnerships that we always lean on were incredibly necessary during this time. And we were all just trying to help each other out. I will say that our teams were pulled incredibly, incredibly thin during this time as they tried to sort out our supports, our increased support, because as I said, we had increased from 51 and incrementally went up to over 100 men. And at another point, we collaborated with Ray of Hope, which is another agency, to open what we called House of Hope. And you can see it here in this picture. And House of Hope was an overflow space for an additional 50 men who couldn't find space in the Radisson Hotel. So we were essentially at that point serving almost 150 people from our 51 people in March. And so throughout March and April, May and June, our staff adjusted and pivoted and redirected and navigated constant, almost daily change. Public health protocols, regional requirements, harm reduction, working with a medical team in an isolation floor, and of course, sometimes neighborhood relationships. And the onboarding of over 50 new team members during this time. At a time when many people had to step back or chose to step back from the workplace. When people like me went home to work in home offices, we had an influx into our inbox of people who wanted to come and help at the shelter. And throughout that time, we hired, as I said, over 50 people. And long after COVID is over, and long after I've forgotten all the parts that I would love to forget, this is one thing I will not forget, is the bravery of these 50 and our current staff and so many others in our community who put their hand up and said, yeah, I can do that. I can come out and help. I want to share one story of one of our team members, Shelly. She's not a new team member to House of Friendship. She's been with us for over 20 years, in fact. But she was one of these stories of putting her hand up. Now, Shelly started her career over 20 years ago in the shelter initially, and eventually she moved into our office, and then later she moved into our fundraising program. And so she had an office job when pandemic hit. She was safe and doing a job that she was perfectly able to keep doing. Most of our programs stayed open during the pandemic, almost all of them. I think one small program had to close. Everything else stayed open. And so there was staff across the organization who may be able to be redeployed if needed. And so we put that call out for help in the shelter. And Shelly was one of the first to put her hand up. She said, yeah, absolutely, put me in. And so Shelly left her safe office job and went to the front line to direct service inside the shelter, one of our most high-risk areas during this pandemic. And she's remained there ever since. And so I saw Shelly around Easter time. I dropped by the shelter and she was in the lobby. She was the person who greeted me. And, we had a chat, and her energy and enthusiasm for being there was totally apparent. I know sometimes you can't tell what expression a person has behind that mask, but Shelly's eyes were sparkling. And it was very clear that she was happy and she was in the place that she was meant to be. Shelly went back to her roots and was in a place that used all of her gifts and talents and her strengths of being welcoming and hospitable and just a loving heart to people. And I think that she's indicative of so many of the people who stepped forward and came to help out during this difficult time. And through it all, the team supported the men, and they advocated for their needs, and they shared the story of what we now call the RAD with anybody who would listen. They provided moments for the guys to feel like real people, to feel human, and to make real connection, have deep and meaningful conversations, and to feel joy. And I'm going to share with you a quick video here of one of these moments of joy. And this is the first music therapy session that we were able to start up again. It was a couple of months after the pandemic had started. And we very tentatively and carefully opened up this program again because music is just so important. It's such a lifeline for people and such a great way for people to connect and express themselves. So Courtney, who you can see on the keyboard, started this session back up again. And I just want to share a moment with you of this. Somebody to lean on, just call on brother, we need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem. Understand? We all need somebody to lean on.
Come on! Woo!
I just love that video. And again, when I saw that, it got posted on Facebook, it just made me cry to see them. I just love that guy's whoops and his joy in playing and singing and being in community with his fellow guys there. So 2 weeks after the Radisson opened, I received an email from one of our supervisors, Terry, and I'm going to read it for you here. She says, on days where it's really frantic and hectic, and on days where I wonder how many people might be impacted by this crisis, I look at what's being created, and I can't believe it. We have 84 people booked in, 84, and we haven't had one critical incident yet. If there's one thing COVID has done for the community, it's definitely proven that we're 100% stronger, 100% able to tackle things head on and forge ahead. Shelter care set up in how many days? Boom, bring it on. I love Terry, bring it on. Can you believe that? Like in two weeks into the pandemic, and we have somebody in our leadership position saying, bring it on. And I just think that that's the audacity of courage in action. And it's that kind of audacity that brought us through the crisis into this place that nobody would have dreamed that we would have been at this point in time. We were doing shelter care, that thing that we had just talked about a few months before, that we had no real idea of a timeline or how we were going to do it. It was literally happening. We had a medical team on site. Housing team had come on site to support. We had mental health and addiction supports coming on site. We had daily access for men who might be having COVID symptoms. All of these things were happening now, years and years ahead of schedule because of this horrible pandemic. So it's just such an incredible story of how quickly things came together and how this vision, once it was cast, it didn't take much as a catalyst to make this happen. At some point early in the pandemic, we all decided we were never going back to our old place at 63 Charles Street East. We had a taste of shelter care and we were never, ever going to go back to the way that we were doing things before. In mid-October, we left the Radisson Hotel. We said our sweet goodbyes to this wonderful place who had treated us so incredibly well. And we headed off to the Inn of Waterloo, this time with over 100 men, a medical team, addiction and mental health supports, and a team of over 80 staff in tow. A little bit different than when we lifted out of 63 Charles a few months before. And we were bringing with us the lessons of the last 8 months and the faith of the community and the vision forward, leaning into the incredible courage and creativity shown by our team and our community. As I prepared for our talk today, I thought a lot about what I've learned during this pandemic about courage, creativity, and culture. What this time has taught me and what I've learned from observing our teams in action. And I want to share a little bit about that with you. So in a nod to David Letterman, who used to stay up very late watching with my brother, I have created a bit of a top 10 list for you. So number 10, having a plan helps, but not having one isn't the end of the world. I'll let you in on a little secret. We did not have a pandemic plan. We did not have much experience in emergency response planning, and we had a very little experience in incident management. So what might have been a recipe for disaster became the birthplace of incredible creativity and problem solving as we mobilized to respond. At our core, our team has a real entrepreneurial spirit, a get it done kind of attitude. We work really, really well together, and we do trust each other a lot. And we leaned on that so much in the first 2 months. Now, I'm not suggesting at all that we should stop planning. Don't hear me say that. But I am saying that successful crisis management, I think, has a lot more to do with how you do it than what you do. Number 9, safety trumps performance. Maslow's hierarchy says that we need to have our basic needs met before we can self-actualize. For our staff to come to work at all, never mind be creative or innovative, they needed to know that they were safe. When our minds are busy searching for safety, we can't be awesome, amazing, creative, innovative people. There's not much room for that. I found that a good supply of PPE and hand sanitizer and a really good list of health and safety directives went a long way to freeing up that mind space and a heart space for what we needed to do and what we came to do. Number 8, be poised to learn. Be brave enough to acknowledge what you don't know and be humble enough to seek the answer wherever you can find it. As we go into some reentry planning in a number of our different programs, it's our staff who are often the ones, and our community members who are often the ones leading the way, helping us to understand what it is that we need to do to provide service well, to meet their needs, to keep staff safe. We need that direction from them. Also, the community themselves in terms of how to respond to those gaps in service, talking to people outside of our programs or leaning on people to help us find locations that we're looking for. We were poised to learn, and you need to be poised to learn and look for answers everywhere. And when you don't know, you can make it up. We made up so much stuff during COVID. We made new policies, we created new workplaces, and entirely new ways of providing service. We learned how to work from home. We learned how to meet with clients in parking lots and in parks. And we learned how to move 3 times in 6 months, like our addiction team did. And I'll save that story for another day. But you can always make it up. There's no playbook right now. And it's kind of fun sometimes to just make your own rules. Number 6, be ready to change direction. In the early days of the pandemic, as we all know, things changed daily, sometimes hourly. New protocols, new directives, for us, sometimes new locations, everything new. Every day was an exercise in flexibility and just breathing through the change. As the saying goes, you can be stubborn with your goals, but be flexible with your methods. Stay true to the long game, but stay nimble in how you get there. Number 5, be confident in your capability. This crisis has shown us that we are far more capable, creative, and resilient than we could have ever imagined. A month before the pandemic hit, this is a true story, we were really struggling to figure out how we could coordinate a common work from home day, a day where everybody just worked from home. We were struggling with office space and we thought this would be a good strategy, but it was feeling impossible between work schedules and needing to be on site and meeting schedules. It just seemed like we weren't going to be able to make it happen. 2 weeks later, we are completely redesigning our service delivery while simultaneously trying to prevent the spread of a pandemic virus throughout all of our programs. Turns out we were far more capable than we could have ever imagined. Number 4, you can't create culture in a crisis. Change is inevitable, and no matter if you have a plan or not, the culture in place when a crisis hits will determine how you navigate that change and how you come out on the other side. Our executive director, John Neufeld, talks about a crisis as a scenario like everybody's just thrown into the ocean and you're in a boat. You're in whatever boat you showed up in and it's storming and raining and lightning and thunder and there's waves. You can't fix your boat or change your boat in the middle of the ocean. The one you came in is the one you have to go in the ocean with. You have to work with what you have. So spending time and money and resources on your culture is so critical. And something like a pandemic exposes that in a huge way. The power of culture can never be underestimated, and you can't hotwire it. Number 3, build trust so courage can take shape. In a crisis, there's no time to handhold. Our team needed to step up in a huge way, and they did. There's so much possibility in each person, and we need to get out of the way and just trust that they can do it because they've shown that they really can. And they need to trust us as leaders. They need to know that when they step off that ledge every day, we're going to catch them and that we have their back and we're going to keep them safe. It's this kind of trust that you have to build on a daily basis, in the small moments, in small interactions, in everyday back and forth. And we need to build it and rebuild it every single day. Number 2, vulnerability, not armor. Brené Brown, who I will refer to as my queen quite often, and I will quote her a few times here, don't worry. She says the definition of vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Sound familiar? And that vulnerability is our most accurate courage. Vulnerability is the birth of innovation, creativity, and change. Exactly what you need in a crisis. We need to make sure that we have an environment where everyone can come to work as their whole self, that we celebrate each other for who we are and what we bring to the game. We need to aspire to create space where people can be wholehearted, tap into their creativity, intuition, knowledge, and experience. And finally, number 1, people over process. People over process every day of the week. Caring for our team is the most important work that we're going to do. As Maya Angelou says, people will forget what you said and they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Our goal at the outset of this pandemic from the very first day was to do everything possible so that when we look back, we could say that we looked after our team, that we had their back, that we kept them safe, that we protected them the very best that we could, that we were there for them in their time of need, but more so that they could say that and that they would have felt that from us. Brené Brown, again, says her definition of integrity is choosing courage over comfort, choosing what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy, and choosing to practice our values rather than simply professing them. Our team is full of integrity and they're bursting with courage and creativity. They aren't interested in that's the way we used to do it or that's the way we have to do it, and they act on that courage. They use that courage to push past boundaries, to go into uncharted territories, and to make the impossible happen. And they thrive in an environment that most people would choose to avoid. They're not satisfied with the status quo, and they absolutely live and breathe our values of compassion, inclusion, justice, dignity, and hope. And I suspect that many of you listening today can say the same thing about your teams, that they're incredible, that they have gone above and beyond during the pandemic, that they have done incredible work, gone to full lengths, put themselves at risk, and just really being far more capable than you could have imagined. And so I'm not an expert on these things, but one thing is clear to me, that we have to keep working to make sure that our culture creates a space where courage and creativity can thrive, where our team can lead the way and break through barriers, and where leaders, we either jump in beside them and break down those walls together, or we jump out of their way and let them at it. Especially in this pandemic reality, we need to aspire to be the kind of organization that trusts our team and equips them for the work that they energetically and wholeheartedly come to work to do. We need to care for them, to love them, and to do our very best for them, as they do the very, very best for the people that we serve, with flexibility, creativity, and bravery, doing far, far more than we could ever imagine. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much. This was such a powerful talk. Yeah, I know, for myself, this was, can relate to so much, and that list of top 10, the top 10 list was excellent. So thank you very much.